Hello, and welcome to another episode of Meet the Music. I'm your host, Thomas Corley. Our next guest is an author. He's got several books under his belt. One book called Crazy, about George Harriman, A Life in Black and White, Sugarcane Academy, The Kingdom of Zydeco, the genre we're talking about today. Michael, thank you, and welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, you've written an extensive and very reviewed book on the music of Zydeco or the culture of Creole.
Right.
And one of the reviews I read specifically said, if you wanted to know about this genre of music, this is the book to get.
Well, thank you. There aren't a lot, actually. So but there are a couple other good ones. A guy named Todd Mouton did a nice book recently. And then Ben Sandmel and the photographer Rick Olivier did a nice book with that. In addition to Ben's writing, had some great photos by Rick. But this was, I guess, the first book that to really focus on Zydeco music as a unique genre. There had been a couple books about Cajun music and Zydeco together by Anne Savoy, the wonderful book, and that was in many ways a foundation of a lot of South Louisiana music books since her music, Cajun music, a reflection of a people, that had some original interviews with Clifton Chenier and other Zydeco and Creole artists. But when I went out in the late 90s to research this book and moved out to the Lafayette, Louisiana area to spend a year out there driving around and talking to musicians, no one had really chosen to do that yet, to really focus on Zydeco itself, which is, of course, a tradition that's connected to Cajun music and rhythm and blues and other genres. But it's a very unique genre in and of itself, too. And as you know, the musicians that perform it are some just wonderful, unique artists as well.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, I know we're trying to talk about the history, but it's funny how the jazz scene or jazz music itself is kind of in the same state, and according to Google, 2 hours away from each other. And I just didn't see how jazz didn't influence Zydeco and Zydeco didn't influence jazz, or it has it,
I would say, it was a fairly 2 hours away now, but not 2 hours away, when Creole music and Amadou
over 100 years ago
recordings, right? In fact, it's kind of remarkable that Amadou Ardoin, the great pioneer and Creole accordionist, did travel to New Orleans with Dennis McGee, the Cajun fiddler, who was his partner. So they did act. One can only imagine what that journey was like from Amadou and Dennis's home in the country into New Orleans and back again. Sadly, there's no real accounting of that. There's a little bit of an accounting of a trip that some of the musicians took up to New York, but just nothing about that trip to New Orleans. And boy, would I love to know more about it. You sort of see some of the borrowings from all sorts of music really come in the post-war era, post-World War II era. That's when you really start to see Zydeco music and rhythm and blues and big band and jazz, and you've got some of the jazz musicians coming through and playing in clubs in the Opelousas, Lafayette area. So you see some of that, borrowing back and forth. Ray Charles, who played, as far as I can tell, everything, was a big influence on Clifton Chenier, who really, idolized Ray Charles and set some Ray Charles songs to accordion and sang them in French. So you see that start to really kind of bubble up more after the war, after the World War II. Before that, it was much more of an isolated sound. Well, I should say that it wasn't isolated in the sense that people were really listening to each other, but it really wasn't as much of a mass media sound.
Right.
You did have Native Americans listening to Cajuns listening to Creoles, listening to Germans, listening to Irish. You had all these folks coming in and out of each other's vision and sound but not really in that big way when everything gets all orchestrated together after the war.
Now, coming from a guy who's just, again, completely naive to the whole genre and the culture of that area, I mean, how would you explain that to somebody who is a tourist or somebody who's just curious about the area? I mean, in particular, when in some of the things I read, it says that it's a combination of Afro-Caribbean and then European.
Mm-hmm.
And then I understand the whole mixing of cultures or mixing of demographics in that area from the early days of slavery. So, and then I understand also that it's the Zydeco music kind of originated from the farms or fields, after working that day or something like that. So, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, people listen to each other. Now, I don't want to minimize at all the racism, in South Louisiana. In fact, the story of Amadou Ardouane really highlights that he was playing for a white audience and did something. Perhaps one story that's most often told has it he accepted a handkerchief from the daughter of one of the men there, a white woman, and was beat up and left for dead because of that infraction. Somehow he crossed that social line. But the art led the way, the music led the way, even when people, did not mingle, the music mingled. And so you hear the blues and you hear Cajun and you hear early Creole, which was on its way to becoming Zydeco, all melding together in really wondrous, energetic, and exciting and creative ways. And I found just in my experience knowing musicians around South Louisiana that they operate on a level of incredible mutual respect for each other. I'm talking about contemporary times, friends of mine and people that I've gotten to know over the last decades of living in Louisiana, that music leads you to a position of respecting and listening to each other, right? That's what music's all about, is listening to each other. And that's sort of the start of healing. Right. So in that way, I think music, has really led the way in South Louisiana, whether it's R&B and jazz in New Orleans or Creole and Cajun and Zydeco out in South Louisiana. So, as you said, it started as a music the workers would make coming in and out of the fields or the swamps, playing for house dances before it was called Zydeco music. And the accordion was favored because it could cut through a loud room of dancers and could be heard, for a long distance. And that grew and grew into what, there's some early recordings, commercial recordings that Amadou Ardouane, who I mentioned, made, but also some field recordings that Alan Lomax made, which captured some of that early, rough, exciting dance sound that people were listening to from, fresh from working outdoors all day.
Yeah.
And that became that the record, that the house dances became bars in the oil towns of East Texas and West Louisiana, where they'd say, I want to hear that music from back on the farm. So you get an accordion player to be in the corner, and then that become more urban, and the music just kept growing and growing and growing to where it is now.
Right. So in one of your chapters in your book, you mentioned what's in a name.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So perusing your book online, how did they get to the word Zydeco?
Yeah, it's such a rich and complicated story. It's one of those words that just came from all different directions. There are scholars with more knowledge than I who have identified languages in Western Africa that seem to connect to the word Zydeco. And then there is a sort of French connection No movie pun intended there, but there's a French connection with the word Zydeco, which means snap bean, and is taken to mean the snap beans are not salty. This is where, when you talk to most musicians, this is where they identify the roots of the music coming from this phrase, Les Zydeco Apostolé, or Zydeco Apostolé, which was a song recorded early, and then Clifton Chenier made a great sort of R&B laced sound out of it. And that basically means that there is no meat, there's no salt meat to flavor the beans, which means it's an expression of poverty. That Zydeco, like the blues, has lots of lyrics about the hard times that people were living in. So, give me the Zydeco. The Zydeco is not salty, which means we don't have any meat in the house. We're hungry. And that's one of many songs in Zydeco that have that idea. There's another one by Buzu Chavis called "Paper in My Shoe," which is about your shoes have worn through, so you put some paper there,
right?
Get a few more miles out of them. And then the difference, and the thing that makes it Zydeco, is it's a wail of anguish turned into an upbeat social dance song that brings people together in a celebration of culture. They're not celebrating their poverty, I don't think, but they're celebrating their endurance and their spirit and their sense of joy. And that's, I think, what connects to people around the world to Zydeco.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, because I've had when I'm reading, I'll have these YouTube songs going from Nathan Williams or Jeffrey, and in the background, and my wife will walk by and she's like, "What are you listening to?" And well, it's called Zydeco, and she says, "Okay, I like that." And I'm just tapping my toes and rocking my head to it. So I'm like, yeah, this is a groovy thing. And the thing about it too is that I don't want to call myself being a sheltered person, but you have commercial radio where they just feed you what they want you to hear, and you just never get exposed to anything else. And then for me, you could tell me, Michael, whether or not, would you connect this to an African American demographic? Is this Black music?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it's not to take anything away from it being Black music to say that it's a very particular form of Black music that comes from French-speaking, self-identifying Black Creoles of South Louisiana. But definitely, I think one of the progenitors of that is buckwheat Zydeco. And buckwheat took a lot from Clifton, and Clifton Chenier took a lot, like I said, from Ray Charles, also James Brown, and there's no doubt about the fact that it came from those traditions. And buckwheat Zydeco was known, he passed away a few years ago, but often if he'd play at a festival, and although Zydeco music and Cajun music, Cajun meaning the music from the people that came here, the French Canadians from the area now in Nova Scotia, came down and settled and brought their tunes and their fiddles and their accordions and intermingled with the Creoles who created Zydeco. But that Creole part of the Zydeco is often erased at festivals. It said, here's a Cajun festival, and buckwheat Zydeco would basically say, I'm not playing until you take that Cajun music sign off, because what I'm playing is Creole, and it's very much a sense of cultural pride and very much identifying with the fact this is Black music, this African American music. One thing that was pretty stunning to see during this past summer in the Black Lives Matter protests in Texas, there was a scene of it was unusual to a lot of people to see Black cowboys riding, into a protest. And so that was shared, and people said, "Oh, look, there's Black cowboys," which is, of course, a big piece of American history that's often neglected because they didn't show up in the John Ford movies or the Western, so much. But they were playing Zydeco. When you actually click on those links, so that Zydeco became a protest music this summer in the Black Lives Matter movement, as it's always been a protest music. In a certain way, it's always been a music of cultural pride and defiance. And the joy in Zydeco, I think, has to be understood in the context of that cultural pride and that sense of defiance.
Yeah. Going back to mentioning Chenier and Ray Charles and James Brown, do you think that was him covering some of their tunes? Do you think that was a breakthrough for Zydeco?
It certainly broke through to a lot of audiences. Clifton broke through to sort of because he was on our Hooli records, which was part of the urban folk movement in the '60s. So Clifton would come and play for folk festivals and with a national audience, and it was his hope that by playing a Ray Charles song or some other kind of contemporary song, he would break through to a national audience, and never really did with that. In fact, Chris Strockwitz, his producer, would talk him into playing some old songs that he would hear from his father's generation, or going back even farther, and sort of make the albums kind of a mixture of the old and the new, because Chris wanted to make sure those old songs got on record as well. And both of those musicians you mentioned earlier, Nathan Williams and Jeffrey Broussard, are a really good example of that. They both come from really rooted families in the Creole community. Jeffrey Broussard came, Dalton Broussard and the Lawtell Playboys. Lawtell is prairie town up in South Louisiana. Really wonderful early Creole song, and then Creole style. When you listen to it, it's got a really rural, earthy sound to it. And then Jeffrey Broussard started a group called Zydeco Force, which was sort of like kind of a rhythm and blues Jackson 5 style rhythm and blues meets Zydeco with a really great 70s and 80s funk sound to it. And great harmonies, great dance tunes, and so Jeff, and then in recent times, Jeffrey Broussard has gone back to picking up the Creole fiddle, which harkens back to his grandfather's music again. So it's always this, kind of watering the roots and seeing how far the branches go over and over and over again. And Nathan Williams, the same thing. He comes from a Creole family in St. Martinville, and started a band. He works with his brother Sid Williams, who has a Zydeco club in Lafayette, and his brother Dennis Paul Williams, a great visual artist and guitar player. And now Nathan's son, Nate Jr., is taking Zydeco in even a more contemporary vein than Nathan is, introducing hip hop and rap and other elements into it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you went that direction, because talking to Jeffrey, he said he wants to get back to the roots of the Creole music, and he wants to have that passed on. But he's afraid. He's afraid that he called them cats. He said, "I'm afraid of the cats today, not keeping the tradition going." He said they were so busy trying to link themselves up with a hip hop artist that that they get away from the tradition, and he's worried. I mean, he's passionate about that, and he was kind of very passionate about when I spoke to him about that.
I believe that.
I was trying to somewhat comfort him by saying it helps the genre when every once in a while you break out with a song that draws attention to it. But anyway, that's where he and I had that conversation in regards to don't be afraid of the modernization of it.
Well, there's always been a tension in Zydeco and Creole music and Cajun music too, between the old and the new, between experimentation and tradition. And I would say that that reflects tensions in traditional cultures across the board. From I don't know, a good friend of mine who grew up in the Ukrainian village in Chicago, and her desire to move out of there, to keep what makes her unique as a Ukrainian American, but also wanted to leave that culture. There's always that feeling of being sort of creatively stifled by your tradition, possibly, but then realizing that your tradition is the source of some of the deepest creative life you could possibly have. So I think there's always that back and forth, and that goes back to the beginnings of Zydeco and Creole music. You know, Clifton, I think, even faced some of that. Although he was such a magnificent performer, no one almost dared probably question him. But you certainly had this tension between the old and the new, and it's always been the case. Whether it's that's too much rhythm and blues, that's too much rock, that's too much rap, and it's not just in the way the music sounds; it's also the way the music is received by its audiences. A lot of the dance halls have closed. The places that you would go on a Saturday night to hear the music. There's a beautiful book,
Herman's book.
Herman's book, yeah. It's actually I just right here, the Ghost of Good Times. I was just looking at that recently. Philip Gould's photos and Herman Fuselet's prose. That kind of pays homage to that era of dance halls and dance clubs, but really it's a different kind of reception now, and the dances aren't quite the same a lot of the times, and there's a sense of something being lost. But then there's this revival that goes on with people like Jeffrey and Cedric Richmond's another one that's kind of gone back and watered the roots like that. But I understand Jeffrey's anguish, and if it propels him to keep doing what he's doing, keep going, because the music he's making, it's always been amazing, and it's always taken unexpected turns, and it's great to hear what he's doing now.
That's good. Yeah, with Jeffrey, and you mentioned the him being in Alaska, that threw me. And so with all
Jeffrey,
of the
wait, yeah, Jeffrey's in Alaska.
He performed in Alaska at a festival.
Right, but he's not there now.
Oh no, yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So with that, Zydeco, traveling around the world.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And here in the United States and kind of the outskirts, the East Coast and the West Coast, and not hearing much about it in the middle of the country. Mm-hmm. Do you have a background in regards to the migration of Zydeco? Like, I was in my research, I found out there's a community in San Francisco.
Yeah, and that was a big part of my research. I think that the California connection is a really important one and very organic. I mean, that's where folks from Louisiana, as they moved, off the farm, when Clifton Chenier said, "I'm out of here. I'm not gonna put this hoe in this rake and this shovel into this dirt anymore," and then went off to the city. And then they went to places, Port Arthur and Orange, Texas, and then to Houston, and then kept pushing west to Los Angeles and San Francisco. So Queen Ida, the first Zydeco artist to receive a Grammy, came from that tradition. With her brother Al Rapone, she made a really exciting form of music that also reflected the Mexican bands that she was hearing, Mexican American bands that she was hearing in Northern California. So you have this, kind of both accordion based music and this new influences coming in from her California experience as well. And their big hit song was called Frisco Zydeco, just to make it clear. But
yeah, I haven't heard that one. Yeah, I haven't listened to Ida yet. I have to catch up with her. Yeah.
Ida's great, and she appealed, because she's just a great performer. She's still around, not as active these days, but I saw her at the Jazz Fest in New Orleans a few years ago. Terrence and Cynthia Simeon worked really hard to bring her back to Louisiana and have a great moment to honor her. But what she did in California is really important. And also, Clifton Chenier's best live album, most exciting live album, was that it was recorded at a church dance in Northern California. Because when he would come out and do the circuit in Los Angeles and Northern California, they'd play a few folk festivals, but they'd also be playing these churches. And these were for people from back home that were really hungry to hear the old sounds. And it's Live at St. Mark's, the name of that CD. And it's just great hearing the interaction between Clifton and his friends from back home, and the people are just so happy to hear him, and this back and forth. You really get a sense of the community that in such an important way creates Zydeco. I mean, Zydeco was really created in a lot of ways from this conversation between the musicians and the dancers, and the community and the artist.
Yeah, I found that in reading reggae was kind of the same way. Reggae was kind of drum up from a dance.
Yeah,
and I got that's how I got a yeah. So
definitely a parallel. Definitely a parallel development there.
Yeah. So with the festivals that seem to keep the artists going, because Jeffrey was saying, if he just had to live off of what he was doing in the Southwest East Texas area, he wouldn't survive.
Right.
So with the broadening of the festivals, I noticed that they fall into different categories. They'll maybe fall into a folk and maybe attached to a jazz, or maybe a bluegrass. But in the Southeast Texas and Southwest Louisiana, they have their own festival.
Yeah.
So are you aware of any Zydeco festivals? I mean, I'm sure they have them outside of the country too when they travel to Europe.
They do, yeah. I traveled to England one time with Beau Jacques, who was a terrific player. If you haven't heard it yet, I recommend digging up his songs. One song he did called Cornbread, or Give 'Em Cornbread, was based on Cornbread Two-Step by Willis Prudhomme, a friend of Beau Jacques from Kinder, who just passed away just a month or two ago. We just lost Willis Prudhomme, wonderful performer. And the melody actually even goes back to the old folk song, Shortening Bread, which was recorded by Leadbelly, Huddie Ledbetter, from North Louisiana, who was kind of discovered by the Lomaxes when Leadbelly was in Angola prison, and played accordion himself, not Zydeco, but played accordion himself. So the whole thing's so intermingled in Louisiana. It's every time you think you've reached the end of the line, it keeps going further. But this song Cornbread, really broke open doors. It was played on commercial radio in Lafayette, Louisiana, and not just the Cajun, the sort of university stations or the smaller stations that played Cajun and Zydeco music. And it brought Beau Jacques to London, and I was asked if I wanted to go along. I basically was kind of a volunteer tour manager, which meant I drove the band around and went to London and Derby with them, and they played a festival in London. They played a club in Derby, and there was a band. No, not Derby. What am I saying? I forgot where it was I forgot where the other place was in England now. But anyway, it was out in the outskirts of England. But there was a band there whose name I forget that played Zydeco music. It was a bunch of Brits that played and they were so excited to meet Beau Jacques, and they were meeting their hero. And the crowd there was dancing. They were working their hardest to dance Zydeco style. So that definitely has been picked up around the world.
Now, I'm not sure where I picked this up at. Well, I don't know if it was YouTube or reading something you wrote, but I understand. Or occasionally the band would have instructors, dance instructors come out.
Yeah, there's especially in these festivals, I think crowds of people. While it's certainly fun to just listen to Zydeco, I put it on. I'm driving. I got to be careful. I can speed sometimes. If I put Zydeco. So exciting. I have gotten a speeding ticket for listening, and I blame the Zydeco that I had on. I was listening to Beau Jacques at the time, and I'm doing 80. But and then a lot of Zydeco performers like Buckwheat Zydeco or Terrence Simeon or Queen Ida. And others have gotten really good at playing for audiences that weren't really dancing, but were there. They're kind of used to standing and watching the stage, maybe moving around a little bit, but not really, at the old traditional Zydeco dance, you're pretty much ignoring the musicians. You're paying attention to the person you're dancing with, and but so some of these bands have gotten good at accommodating and putting on a good show for crowds when they're watching. But I think they've also found that people are hungry to try a new form of dance as well. And I think audiences were really excited about the idea of learning. You see that with the swing dance craze as well, to actually learn how to ask somebody to dance and dance as a couple. That's a big part of why I was attracted as a fairly young guy from Minnesota and Indiana that came down, found his way to the Maple Leaf Bar in New Orleans, and was listening to John Delafosse and his son Gino Delafosse playing on drums behind him. And I saw these couples dancing on the floor, and I have to confess, the music was exciting, but trying to get on that dance floor was more exciting.
So I take it you don't have two left feet then.
Well, you can dance with two left feet if you have a forgiving partner. But I tried. I've done my best.
Yeah. So speaking of the bands, so the accordion is well known. Now, I don't want to mispronounce the correct term from the rub board, so I'll leave that to you. But
Patois,
patois?
It's called a bunch of things, but patois is sort of the from the word meaning rub, and then rub board or scrub board, or you can even hear people say washboard sometimes, which reflects back on its roots as a washboard.
Yeah. So were they all a part of it? And in fiddle, were they all apart from the beginning, or did they just come instrument by instrument and it was just started off as the accordion?
Yeah, I don't even think it really started off necessarily with the accordion. You hear some of that early music and
the jure. Is it jure? Is that how you pronounce it?
You hear some of that jure music, and that's a cappella with hand claps and vocal effects. But the accordion certainly came in early. The fiddle came in early, and the washboard came in early. And if you see some old photographs, like WPA photographs of the time, you see musicians playing accordion and a wooden washboard, holding a washboard with one hand and scraping it, with the other. And it's Clifton and his brother Cleveland Chenier, who was his sideman, throughout most of his career, that are credited with revolutionizing that instrument and taking it to a metal shop and creating a washboard with a metal shoulder bracket, so you can put it right on your body. Don't have to hold it with one hand. That frees up both hands to play. So it captures much more the kind of polyrhythmic sense of the music, and you can just do, as you see by watching these rubboard players, you can just do an incredible amount of both rhythms and tone with that piece of metal and a couple of scrapers. And Cleveland would use bottle openers, and I don't remember how many he had, but it was a number of bottle openers on each hand, and just created this incredibly rich and textured sound with it. So that's a big part. And then with that sort of post-war era, you saw Cajun music bringing in pedal steel guitars and some more influences from Nashville, and that's when you saw Zydeco music bringing in more R&B influences like horns, like horn sections. Trumpet or saxophone, especially. You see saxophone in bands of that style of Zydeco, that sort of Clifton Chenier derived R&B style of Zydeco.
Yeah,
I don't want to leave out the guitar. I don't want to get in trouble with my guitar and bass and drum playing friends too, because that, of course, is essential to the bands too, to lay out that rhythm. And really, guitar and bass and drums and rubboard, that's all rhythm. You got 4 rhythm instruments working at once there. That's one reason the music is so intoxicating.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but is the rubboard considered percussion?
For what?
Is it considered a percussion instrument?
A percussion is? Oh yeah, absolutely a percussion. Yeah, a percussion.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I was thinking that, but I just didn't know, and I didn't think to ask Jeffrey.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and there are some just incredible rubboard players out there to watch. And it becomes, with people like Rockin' Dupsy Jr., the rubboard player often becomes sort of the showman of the band, because there's so much you can do. You can spin around and do a lot when you're sitting there rubbing that thing.
I was going to kind of comment on the fact that they appear to have the most energy on stage.
Right.
You know?
Right. Well, and they've got the most freedom to dance around because they really just have that one metal vest on. So that's definitely the case.
Yeah. Now, I have not seen a performance where no one was not sweating. Every performer is sweating.
Then you've seen nothing but the best then.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. Well, sir, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Do you have anything up and coming for yourself?
No, I tell you, I miss the dances. The last thing that I did before everything shut down with the with the pandemic was a Creole Zydeco dance out at St. Landry Parish, the Visitors Center, where it was Jeffrey Broussard was there actually, along with Sean Ardouin and Chris Ardouin and their father Lawrence Ardouin and a couple other players, and they were playing the music of Amédée Ardouin. And kind of honoring their Creole history there, and also a beautiful statue of Amédée that just this past year maybe 2 years ago, was put up at this visitors center as a way of kind of honoring the history of the music and the people that make the music. So that was the last time I'd been in a dance, and I imagine it's going to be a little while before I get back to a dance. But until that happens, I'll just have to do like the rest of us and enjoy the virtual music festivals and catch Nathan and Gino Delafosse, Nathan Williams, Cedric Richmond. I imagine Jeffrey has too, but I'm not sure I've caught any yet. Are putting on shows via Facebook Live or other platforms. So I encourage everybody to check those out and to tip the musicians, because right now we're in a time where musicians, if we want them to keep going and we want to keep making music that means so much to us, we need to help them out right now.
Yeah, I truly agree with that 1000%, because I actually think, it's a scary thought, but there could be a whole field of professions that can be completely wiped out because of this.
Yeah, they're going to be hurting, and some of the people that are going to be hurting and may decide they just can't do it anymore might be some of the people that we turn to the most to hear their music. So, there are places people can find Zydeco musicians, and probably just search out search out the younger players' names on something like Facebook and find their pages and or their websites if they have them. Many of them do. And just figure out a way to hear them during this time and show them some love.
Right. Yeah. Most definitely. I came across something. I don't know how authentic it was, because I saw it after I talked to Jeffrey, but there was a few artists out on PayPal, some kind of PayPal, like a GoFundMe on PayPal kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think artists are having to get creative with the funding. Patreon is another place that you can go and support individual artists.
Yeah. At the end of this, once we start loading up, I'm going to have the artists. In fact, every person you probably mentioned, I'm gonna have a transcript of this, and every person you mentioned, we're gonna have a link to if they have something on Amazon or Google Play, and along with your 3 books.
Oh, well, absolutely. Yeah, I just put out that when I did the book on George Harriman, who's a cartoonist from New Orleans, that created a comic called Crazy Cat. And when I put that book out, I wanted to make sure that the Kingdom of Zydeco was back out in print. So I did a new edition of that and added a new introduction and a little more information about contemporary Zydeco in it. Thanks to friends like Herman Fuselier and others who keep me updated. That's another thing people should do, by the way, is find Herman's radio show. It's on KRVS radio. He's got a Saturday morning Zydeco show. It's just the best thing to listen to, and you can listen to it streaming from anywhere. So I'd recommend people hear that as well. But then my favorite thing about the new edition of Kingdom of Zydeco was that Buckwheat Zydeco very graciously offered to write a foreword for that. So I've got a few nice words from Buckwheat Zydeco fairly shortly before he passed away that lead off that book. So, and that book's around in print, and I encourage people to pick it up, of course.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I saw an interview that you did. I think it was WKXPN.
Mm-hmm.
It was a conversation at the end. There were credits there for buckwheat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there was a connection with Bob Muggy's.
Yes.
Movie. Yeah. And
Yeah.
Bob, he's got a couple there's some great movies out there to watch too, if people want more. I would certainly start with Bob Muggy's movie, especially The Kingdom of Zydeco, which not coincidentally has the same title as my book, because I stole his title from him. It was so good. And then, and also Les Blank's movies are really wonderful. He's got some really early stuff with musicians like Boisek and Ardouin and Canary Fontenot, and a film called Hot Pepper about Clifton Chenier. So I'd recommend finding those out too.
Are you seeing audiences younger
For Zydeco?
Yeah. At a festival. I mean, I know at some of the dance joints there.
Yeah, definitely the new stuff that people are doing. J. Paul Jr. and still Keith Frank, although he's not as young as he was. He was the kid on the for a while, bringing all these new musical ideas out, and now he's sort of almost an old master of this of his style. And other musicians, Step Rideau also came out with that, Nate Jr. And others. Lots of young people are coming to their dances. I guess not now, because we're not getting together like that. But up until the shutdown, it was a new style of Zydeco, but it was drawing a really young audience, and a big audience. So. And there were these, crossovers. That guy Cupid that did the song "Cupid Shuffle." He's from South Louisiana, and he did some work with Zydeco musicians as well. He's definitely he doesn't play Zydeco. That's not his thing, but he works with Zydeco musicians. And that song, even "Cupid Shuffle," it's got it's got a Zydeco shuffle kind of sound to it, actually. And so that stuff definitely is appealing to young audiences. And I think people like Jeffrey and Cedric Richmond are hoping those young audiences then will dig deeper and find that old stuff as well. So we keep on with the circle of musical life.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's the key to some things is the audience, keeping the audience there. Yeah.
Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, sir. We're at the beginnings and the infancy of it, but I hope to maybe one day have you or have Jeffrey and his Creole Cowboys and everyone in the country, with a delegation, everyone from the Southwest Louisiana area, just going from the East Coast to the West Coast, introducing everybody to that brand, that genre of music.
That's great.
Yeah, maybe we can get the the National Endowment of Arts to fund it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And arts funding, that's another piece of it. It's so vital. I talked about those early Lomax recordings. That was a federal project. Talking about those early photographs of Creole musicians, that was a federal project. So, I think during this time of economic uncertainty, while I was talking about the importance of going on and tipping the musicians and helping them out, I think we need to realize that keeping the arts going is a national priority as well.
Right. But I have to believe, we will, because after the pandemic of 1918, jazz kind of got its birth. Well, I would say got its birth, but it blossomed and.
Right, the 20s.
The 20s, yeah, and then Zydeco, there.
Mm-hmm.
So I gotta believe, I gotta have faith.
I'm with you there.
Yeah. All right, sir. Thank you so much for being a part of our show, Meet the Music. Thank you for sharing everything that you have. I'm in the recording right now.
I'm gonna go listen to some Zydeco. Thanks for talking. I enjoyed this a lot.
All right, thanks, sir. Take care.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Meet the Music. That episode was actually recorded early on at the beginning of our journey. Now this is going to end our season, and we're going to start recording for our new season to follow. So please share, subscribe, and look forward to the musical journey. Thanks again.